Welcome to Beyond You podcast. I am so glad that you're here. I thought what better way than to have this experience. I've been talking to you guys just through the sessions, and as we're adding, people are coming as far as we have a new therapist on as well for our young adults as well. Just hearing all this new information, I thought what better way than to talk about real experiences. So I want to tell you about a moment I had. I was getting ready in the morning. Nothing dramatic though, just the mirror, my reflection, a regular day, just real basic. And I was running through my mental list the way I always did. What I had to do, where I'd fallen short, what needed to be better, just always ways to be able to improve myself in some capacity. And I caught myself mid thought. And I was thinking, you always do this. You can never just get it together. Why can't you be different? You're too much. You're not enough. I have the same thoughts that you guys have at times. And this is what I didn't realize though. But something made me stop. I just want to be able to just put that in there too, because I knew that voice. I had heard that voice before, and it wasn't mine. It was his. Those were almost exactly the things my ex used to say to me. Not every day, but enough to make an impact, just small, small different ways. Enough that they had stopped being his sentences and started being mine. Enough that somewhere along the way, I had picked up his script and started delivering just it to myself without him ever having to say another word. And we do that when it comes to parents, exes. We don't realize when we do that. But I realized that I had become my own toxic relationship. And that realization, that quiet, devastating, ultimately freeing realization changed something in me that no amount of processing and doing all the things had quite touched yet. So before we go any further, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe right now. If you're listening to us, make sure you follow, turn on the notification bell so you just know that we're just showing up every week. It's free. We just want to make sure that we drop your inbox to keep giving this advice. We can start healing together and having peace every day. That's what I want for you guys. Welcome to the Beyond You podcast, where we have real conversations about healing, trusting yourself again, and building the kind of relationships that actually feel good. I'm Samantha, and if you've ever felt like you're just going through the motions, like you're doing all the right things but still feeling disconnected, you're in the right place. Because here we go beyond the surface, beyond the hurt, beyond the patterns that keep you stuck. So take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let's get into it. So, know that I'm recording this because I know I'm not the only one who needed to hear this, right? And I've heard that this has been happening in how you're talking to yourself. You're thinking this way you're talking to yourself is from you, when a lot of times it's not. So drop a comment before we even start. Whose voice does your inner critic sound like? You don't have to name them exactly. Just tell me X, a parent, a coach, a friend. Let's just find out how many of us are carrying someone else's words inside our own head. Because sometimes it's just not feeling alone and it can make a difference. So let's talk about it. So, I like to start with just kind of sectioning things off so you really just kind of make and understand just exactly what's going on. So the moment of recognition, right? Because I think we'll allow ourselves a time to really see just and recognize what's happening. So I want to spend some time here because I think the moment of recognition is something we rush past. We want to get to the insight, the solution, the healing. Okay, when I tell you, I understand that. But the moment itself matters because if you've had it or if you're about to have it, I want you to know what it actually feels like so you can honor it when it comes. Right. And we are all about being comfortable, uncomfortable around here. So you can just make changes for yourself. So for me, it came on an ordinary Tuesday. I believe it was Tuesday. Nothing had happened, no trigger, no dramatic event. It's just me and my own thoughts. and the sudden, just horrifying clarity that the voice running in the background of my mind, I realized was not a natural one, right? Like, this didn't sound like something I would say, but sometimes we just do it so much we think it's a habit. So it was not like the conscience, it was not just like wisdom, it just was him and it was internalized. And once I heard it that way, I just couldn't unhear it. I started noticing it everywhere. Just a voice that said, "You're being dramatic," every time I had a feeling that being too much or too sensitive. I kind of sometimes hear you guys say that in sessions as well, just being dramatic, just talking about yourself in a certain way. And realize like that could have been a parent, or that was, in this case, just an ex, the voice that said, "You always make everything about yourself every time I had a need," right? That was him. The voice that said, "You're lucky anyone puts up with you," or "You're too much. Anytime someone treated me with less than I deserved, and I almost let it go without saying anything." That was him. So understand that he had been gone for a long time, for years. And but it was still talking because it just happened in these small sort of ways. And I think I got different episodes on how to recognize with emotional manipulation. But I'm sharing this not because my story is everyone's story. Yours will be really specific to you, shaped by who it was, what they said, how long it went on. But I'm sharing it because the structure of what happened to me is something I have seen reflected in client after client, conversation after conversation. And I wanted to be able to address this. So when someone talks to you in a certain way for long enough, you eventually start talking to yourself that way. And you probably resonate with what I'm talking about. I've heard you guys talk about it because we don't realize the coolest part is that you start doing their work for them. They don't have to be in the room anymore. Whether it's like, and it could be just about, oh, well, you're a bad mom. If you do something, you make a mistake. Or they're just already inside of your head. So let me know if this has happened to you at all, right? Like there's someone's voice just inside of your head. Because when we allow ourselves to fully recognize it, it can really make just a difference in knowing that, okay, this is not my voice. But of course, I'll give you guys practical steps on how to work through this as well. But I want you to really pay attention to how you're treating yourself. Okay. Because I think more of us have had that moment than we ever even say out loud. So now we want to go into how this actually works. Like, how does this even happen? Right? Where you start becoming the voice of somebody else. So I'm going to take a minute and explain what's actually happening here, but not in therapy speak and do all that, but just in just real language, because understanding the mechanism is just what makes it easier to interrupt, right? Because I want you to really focus on being able to interrupt this. So when we're in a relationship where someone consistently says certain things to us, criticizes how we handle our emotions, labels our needs as too much, or dismisses our feelings as overreactions, tells us we're not measuring up, we don't realize that our brain does something remarkable and terrible at the same time, right? So, what tends to happen is it starts to store those messages as if they were our own thoughts. Like, you probably heard me say in just my sessions that we pick things up all the time and our brain doesn't know who's saying it. So that's why we have to really pay attention in what we're taking in. But let me just explain here's why. Your brain is always looking for patterns. It wants to predict what's coming in so it can prepare you. And if someone in your life, someone you're close to, someone you love, someone who opinion registers as significant, keeps repeating a message, your brain starts to encode that message as information about you. So understand it's not information about what they think about you, information about who you are. Like your brain doesn't know the difference. And here's the part that matters most. It happens faster and more completely when the relationship involves love, fear, dependency, or confusion, because those emotional states make the brain more receptive to incoming information. They lower that filter, just kind of like let that guard down, right? Because it keeps being repeated consistently. So, which means the people closest to us have the most access to instill programming within us. And the people who are confusing, unpredictable, and intimately unkind, the hot and cold ones, you know what I'm talking about? We had it in a different episode. The ones who made you feel amazing sometimes and terrible other times, those people had particularly deep access because confusion keeps the brain's learning systems wide open. So, what you're left with is not just memories of what they said, you're left with a voice that sounds like your own that is actually theirs. And we don't realize that that voice often says things, and I want to be able to give examples. They say things like, you're overreacting. Nobody is going to want to deal with this. I know I've all heard that one. Why can't you just be easier? Like just making you feel down about yourself. I've also heard ones like, you're too sensitive. You should be grateful for what you have. You're not the kind of woman who gets to want that. Like we just get these different messages. I want to know if these ring any bells for you. Here's what I need you to understand. That is not your voice. That is a voice that was installed in you by someone who benefited from you believing it. So now we talked about that. I always like to be able to add just the cultural layer we have to name. And of course, everyone can be able to listen to this, but I want to just be able to know that I have a cultural layer here as well. Now I have to add it specific to us, just a black and brown people here, right? This conversation that the mainstream inner critic content almost never names for us. We didn't come to self-criticism through our toxic relationships alone. Right? Like many of us grew up in households where high expectations were survival strategy, where perfectionism was just protection, where being above just reproach was the only way to move safely through systems that were looking for reasons to dismiss us. So our parents, our grandparents, they were often critical, not because they didn't love us, but because the world they were preparing us for had no room for our mistakes. And then we bring that already sharpened inner critic into relationships with people who find it and use it, just use it, who know that if you're being too much, it will land because some part of us already believed it. So by the time we're in a toxic relationship, understand that we are not starting from a place of just solid self trust here that they have to dismantle. Many of us are starting from a place where just some pieces were already missing. And what happens is they fill those gaps with their version of us, right? We're already made assumptions about who we are before we've been talked to at times. So, which means the work isn't just unlearn what he said. The work is often deeper. Unlearn what the world said first, and then unlearn what he reinforced or the parents, whoever reinforced it as well. And that is harder, and it is not your fault, but it is harder, right? But it's absolutely possible to be able to work through this. So I also want to name specifically, just especially with that just strong Black woman narrative, has its own critic baked in it. That voice that says you don't get to fall apart, you don't get to need things, you handle it, and you don't complain. That is exhausting. And understand that that voice has been in us since before any man or toxic friend ever said a word to us. And our relationships have sometimes found that voice and turned up the volume on it. You deserved a different message from the beginning. The fact that you didn't get it is not something you need to make up for by being harder on yourself. It's something you get to heal from slowly with support in your own time. So just want to make sure to put that out there. Okay, so I want to talk about on what everything changed actually means. I know it can mean different things for different people. And I want to be honest about something that I think healing content sometimes gets wrong. When I say, and then everything changed, I don't mean I had one moment of clarity and suddenly my inner critic disappeared. That is not what I'm saying. I don't mean that I woke up the next morning just loving myself completely. I don't mean that I have it figured out. We're all on this journey together, right? We're all trying to figure it out. But what changed was that I stopped mistaking the voice for mine. And I want you to understand that that distinction sounds small, but it is not small because when you believe the critical voice is your own honest assessment of yourself, you listen to it. So you treat it as accurate. You make decisions based on it. You stay small based on it. You tolerate less than you deserve based on that. So I want you to really kind of pay attention to whose voice that is. But when you recognize that voice is borrowed as something that was given to you by someone who had reasons to want you to believe it, it loses authority. It just doesn't disappear, but it loses its ability to pass off as truth. And from there, something else becomes possible. And this is what I want you to start noticing the gap between what the voice says and what you actually know to be true. Because you start asking, is this mine or is it theirs? And that's what I want you to start asking. I did a Substack on this as well to talk a little deeper on just experience I had that, or I had, but the client had. And sometimes, not every time, but sometimes you can answer that question clearly. And in those moments, you get to choose what to do with what's left. Here's what that started to look like for me in practice. Right. I love giving practical tips. So the voice would say, you're too much. And instead of just absorbing it, I'd pause and I'd ask, who said that first? And the answer was almost always a name. And that name wasn't mine. So is it my voice? Is it someone else's voice? But then afterwards, and then I'd ask, do I actually believe this or did I inherit it? And often the answer was, I don't believe this. I was handed this, or and and I don't have to keep holding it. Right. And even with you saying something to yourself, right? Or that's not true, or something where you just don't take it in like it's yours. Because understand when you just allow that pause, a single question is where the change lives, not in the grand gesture, not in the breakthrough session. In that pause, acts consistently over months and years until your own voice starts to get louder than the borrowed ones. So, what better way than start with how to start speaking to yourself differently. Right? So, how we would go about doing that is thinking, how do you start reclaiming your own voice? Right? We talked about this over in the ebook that's with the Miss Me Journal as well. But I'm going to give you what has worked for me and for the women I work with. These are not quick fixes, they are practices. And practices work through repetition. Just want to make that clear. Yeah, it is a practice. So it's like any muscle. So, first, what I want you to do is I want you to name the voice before you argue with it. When the critical thought becomes before you try to counter it or analyze it, just name it. That's the borrowed voice. You don't have to know whose it is completely, just create the separation. This voice is not me. This is something I'm carrying. Those are just two different things. So, the naming does something neurological. It moves the thought from automatic to just being observed. You're just observing what's going on. And understand when having observed thoughts, they have less power than the automatic ones, right? And I explained in my sessions where you're not becoming, you're noticing. Right? It's another way of saying it if you have worked with me before. Second, I want you to write down what the voice says most often, but not to dwell on it, to see it very clearly. When it's inside your head, it's everywhere. When it's on a page, it has a shape, and shaped things can be examined. So get curious about the pattern. What does it say when you succeed? What does it say when you have needs? Like, really pay attention on the patterns, what happens. What does it say when you set a boundary? The pattern will tell you something that you might not even recognize or suspect is going on. So, doing that. Third, I want you to ask, would I say this to someone I love? This is the simplest and most effective reality check I know. When the voice says, you're pathetic for still thinking about him. Would you say this to a close friend, a best friend, your daughter, your sister, who is going through the exact same thing? Sometimes being able to take it out of our heads and see someone close to us, if you would say that to them, because the answer is almost always no. And that gap between how you speak to the people you love and how you speak to yourself is the distance between where you are and where you're going. Okay. So start closing that gap. And I'm not asking you to do it all at once. Remember, this is a practice, but one conversation at a time, one moment at a time. Fourth, I want you to practice speaking to yourself the way the right therapist would. Right. So I love on how you guys mentioned of like, I thought about you when doing this, or I thought about you, whatever, or whoever your close person is, or your therapist is, like understand someone that is cheering you on. I want you to think about that as well, like what they would say. But I just want to be honest, grounded, compassionate, the way a good therapist speaks to you when you're being unnecessarily cruel to yourself. That was hard, and you're still here. You did the best you could with what you had at the time. Right? Really being there for yourself. You're allowed to need things. Your your feelings make sense given what you've been through. Like, just that kind voice. Practice it even when it feels fake, especially when it feels fake, because fake is often just what unfamiliar sounds like before it becomes natural. So it's okay. It's definitely okay if it feels fake. So fifth, I want you to be able to get support. Get support. This is real work. It is not just that self-help book work or podcast work. Because I'm grateful you're here. Love you guys. But this is therapeutic work. Internalized voice of Someone who hurt you is a relational wound, and it heals most effectively in relationships with a therapist, in community, with people who can reflect back to you a version of yourself that isn't filtered just through someone else's cruelty. And if that feels out of reach right now, start with what is accessible, right? I've plenty of essays on Substack, on the gentle work with Samantha, the journal, this community here at YouTube, and through where you're listening on your podcast, and keep moving toward more support as you can. You don't have to do this alone. Actually, you weren't meant to. I don't think we really allow ourselves to recognize that. So I hope this was truly helpful for you. Again, I am so glad you made it this far and that you're here. But I definitely want to say something before you just close this video, this podcast. The fact that you absorb someone else's cruelty so completely that it starts to sound like your own voice. Understand that is not weakness or stupidity or something to be ashamed of, right? It happens. It happens. Life does its thing, right? That is what happens to a person who loves deeply in an unsafe place. A lot of times we blame ourselves for things instead of just recognizing on how we deeply love. And the moment you recognize it, the moment you catch the voice and ask, wait, is this actually mine? That is one of the most bravest things a person can do because it is so much easier to keep believing the voice than to question it. So, thank you so much for being here in the podcast. Make sure to catch this next episode that it will be coming up for next week or watch the one previously. And I cannot wait to see you then. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. You can find me on TikTok at Moving Beyond You or on Instagram at I am Samantha.a or just over here in the YouTube community or where you have your podcasts. Any other questions, let me know. But I will talk to you soon. You are a brave, beautiful soul, and I cannot wait to talk to you next week.